Good morning for those in Europe. Good afternoon for those in China. Welcome to EU SME Center webinar series. This is Ludmila Hiklova, Market Advisor in SME Center China, and you have just joined our webinar on the due diligence for the joint venture mergers and acquisition. Before we move into the seminar, let me first cover a few technicalities. On your screen, you will see the window which says that you can send us a question during the course of the seminar. We will answer your questions either during the 5-10 minutes at the end of the seminar, but because we have quite a large number of the participants, we may not be able to cover all your questions. But please don't worry, we will send you the reply via the email. We will send a reply to those who will register with the EU SME websites. So please use this feature questions to send us any question to the topic or any other question you may wish. For those who are joining us for the first time, let me first shortly introduce the EU SME Center. We are a project funded by European Union. We have an office in Beijing, and our major purpose is to assist European small and medium-sized enterprises to export to China or to invest to China. The way how we help is primarily by providing information and advice. We cover 4 areas of expertise. We employ professionals in the business development, legal and tax, standards and conformity, and human resources and training. The way how you can get the information from us is either via the inquiries, which means send an email to us, we will get back to you during the 1 week. Or if you are in Beijing, you can consult us face-to-face. Of course, there is an option that you can call us directly. In addition to that, the center issues publish a number of publications. Currently, we have 80 plus reports, guidelines, and case studies. We provide our services in the form of the training and the seminars and the webinars like today. I would like to mention as well very useful databases which we update regularly. It's a database on the service providers, so in case you need a legal advisor, tax advisor, or any other company, you can use the database yourself for the searching. We keep updated database for the international fairs and exhibitions in China. In addition to the information and advice, we provide support services. From those, I would like to mention hot desking. So if it happens that you come to Beijing and you don't have an office yet here, you can spend a few days or the weeks with us, have the meetings here, and be in direct contact with us. From our recent publications, I would like to just shortly introduce our diagnostic kit, which is a very useful tool for those intending to come to China. You can learn not only about the Chinese macroeconomy and the business environment. There are 4 chapters, there are 4 volumes about ways how to enter the Chinese market, about exporting, and importantly, knowing your partners in China. How you can get in touch with us is via the online portal. Then after very straightforward registration, you will get access to all information which we provide, all those reports and the guidelines. And you can use the Ask the Expert service. You will be regularly updated and informed about our events and the webinar, and you can as well register for the hot desking. So this is for the introduction about the center, and let's come now to the topic of today, and it is due diligence for joint ventures, mergers and acquisitions. Even currently, majority of the foreign companies chooses a way of the WFE, wholly owned foreign invested enterprise. There might be an option, and there are options, other options for them to establish themselves in China, and it is partnering with the Chinese company. It has a lot of disadvantages, but it has a lot of risk in itself. And to explain more about this, we have invited today Mr. Michael Schroeder, who is our speaker for today. Mr. Schroeder is a very experienced lawyer. He is long-term resident in China, and he advises multinational companies, but as well small and medium-sized enterprises. He is fluent in Chinese, which is very important added value, because there are not many Western lawyers experienced with Chinese law and as well fluent in Chinese. Currently, he is a partner in a law firm called Partners in Beijing. He and his team is able to provide not only services related to the foreign investment, but any other. They are able to cover many other legal areas. So now I give the floor to Mr. Schroeder. Welcome.
Thank you, Ludmila, very much for the eloquent introduction to the topic and to my person. Before we go into much detail, let's have a look at what we are going to talk about today. First of all, we want to answer the question, what for and why do due diligence? After that, we look about different transaction structures and how they might influence the procedure or the outcome of the due diligence. Afterwards, we're going to look at the procedure itself and how it's being done before we look into more detail on the content and what the due diligence is all about. At the end, we also want to stress some formalities and problems which are particular to China.
So before we go to the slides, we have prepared for you two polls, two questions, which will help us to assess your experience with the due diligence. So allow me to launch the first poll, and it's the question is: did you ever perform a due diligence before? And I can see you voting. I will give you a few more seconds. Okay, so let's close the poll, and I share with you the results. So it seems that almost 60% of you have no experience with the due diligence on the side, like that you yourself perform the due diligence. Some of you, about 30%, have experience of doing due diligence in China, and some of you have some experience in doing due diligence in your home country. I will follow with the second poll, with the second questions, and it's it's a question related as well to the due diligence investigation, and it is: have you ever been subject to due diligence investigation yourself? Means not that you perform due diligence on subject, but someone performed due diligence on you. And the answer to this question is we have only two options: is yes or no. There's nothing more to add. Okay, and fine. So let me close the poll and share the results with you. And it seems that 70% haven't been subjected to due diligence. So if I make a summary, of our two polls, it seems that the topic of today is very relevant, and I'm looking forward to what Mr. Schroeder will tell us. So let's back to the presentation.
Well, I was quite surprised to hear that some of you already have experience in China, so let's see how we're going to look at your experience, maybe with the questions you have afterwards. Before we go into much detail, let's ask the question. Due diligence procedures are lengthy, time-consuming, cost-consuming, and you put a lot of resources into it. So the question must be allowed, why and what for do we need due diligence? The answer is rather simple. It's to protect your investment. At the beginning, let me give you a provoking quote of a due diligence expert who says, every failure of a business transaction can be seen as a failure of due diligence. To my mind, there is some truth in it. If you look at it, the main reason why you do a due diligence is to protect your investment in two ways. First, to pay exactly what your target is worth, and not more, but also not less. And second, to secure the feasibility of the investment or of your project. You don't want to invest a lot of money and resources in a project and find out laterwards that it's possible to put into action. What else can you do with the result of your due diligence is to use it as a tool or as an information base for further negotiations with the target, and also before actually going into the deal to optimize the structure and help you to put the deal exactly the way which makes it most profitable for all participants. And the last point I put on the slide is to smoothen post-transaction integration and transition. Of course, the due diligence process doesn't stop where the transaction is sealed. It also helps, the information you get during the whole process also helps you to put the whole transaction into action afterwards. So I talked a lot about transactions. Let's look at different transactions and how they influence the way the due diligence is done or the content of the due diligence. You can divide every transaction into either category, either on an exchange level or on a corporate level. On an exchange level, we are talking about the sales of goods or services, and on a corporate level, we talk about joint ventures, acquisitions, mergers, and the like. For all these transactions, you do a due diligence. You do not always call it due diligence. For example, on the exchange level, you often call it supply chain management. However, on the corporate level, you do call it due diligence, and it's nothing less than using due care, due diligence, investigating your target. And as different corporate transactions have a different intensity, for instance, joint ventures are less intensive than acquisitions or mergers, it also reflects on the intensity of the due diligence, which is the highest with the mergers and the lowest with joint ventures. Let's look at the joint venture structure. Ideally, you have two parties which conclude a joint venture contract and agree to establish a third company, the joint venture company. As a result, you have the parents which still stay in existence and keep their corporate identity, and you have the joint venture company which then operates independently. The parents are only liable for the contributions they put into the company. They are not liable for any other faults of the other party, which has an impact on the due diligence procedure afterwards. The specific risk you want to avoid is that the other party contributes something which is not worth what you're paying for, or which is not performing the way you want it to perform. So we can say that the due diligence in joint venture structures are less intensive, and you can focus them on the specific risks involved in joint venture procedures, especially the estimation of the assets to be contributed to the joint venture, or the ability of your partner to contribute whatever he promises to contribute to the joint venture.
I'm sorry for interruption. I have a question. You are speaking, you are talking about the joint ventures. As regards the joint ventures and other ways of the investing into the market, like the WOFI or mergers and acquisition, how common are the joint ventures comparing to the other ways?
Well, of course, in the beginning, greenfield operations were the major transaction which has been chosen by many investors into China. For some industries, however, it's not possible to put up a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. There are legal restrictions which make it necessary to have a joint venture with a Chinese partner. Otherwise, you would not be allowed to do business. And in recent years, it's more and more common to not only think about joint ventures, but to just jump into the market and having the whole set up infrastructure and all licenses by just using existing companies and incorporating them into the own corporate structure. Still, in terms of numbers, the wholly foreign-owned enterprise and the joint venture are still on the top of the list, but mergers and acquisitions are catching up quickly.
Thank you.
For mergers and acquisitions, first let me look on acquisitions. Before the acquisition starts, you have two parties, and afterwards you have one party owning an equity share in the other or incorporating the other company into the own group. For a merger case, you have the same two parties at the beginning, and at the end you have one new company, and the new company holds the assets of the companies, of the parent companies. That means the parent companies cease to exist, and instead of two companies, you have only one company at the end. And this also have an influence on the due diligence you want to do. Because the parent companies change their corporate identity and incorporate the other party into their own company, there are more things to consider. You have more risks because now you're also liable for defaults of the other company. The due diligence is more intensive and has to focus on all risks, not only on parts of the assets or the contributions that need to be made, but also on all the other parts, including the corporate setup, because a fault in the corporate setup or any other financial risk might fire back on the whole operation or on the mother company as well.
Yeah. Before we move to the other slides, we have one last poll, one last question to share with you, and it is what according to your opinion is the biggest challenge for your business when finding or investigating business partners or investment targets in China? Is it language and culture gap, or is it different business mentality, or do you think it's at a finding reliable information? We are just looking for your opinion, not looking for the best answer. So we see your votes coming. Seems that most of you probably think that finding reliable information is the most difficult one. Okay, so let's close the polls now, and I will share with you the results. Yeah, so 59, almost 60% of you think that finding reliable information is the most difficult, the most challenging, followed by different business mentality and closely language and culture gap. So back to the presentation, back to the slides. What do you think, Mr. Schroeder, what do you think about those results? Most of the people think that finding reliable information is the most difficult. What's your idea? Is it the biggest obstacle, or where you put it into?
Well, I'm not surprised that most people choose this answer, because it is in fact very difficult to find reliable information, and the major part of the due diligence deals exactly with that, to find ways to get reliable information. On the other hand, different business mentality has been chosen by only a few participants. These two answers, the business mentality and finding reliable information, are closely linked together. If you are able to understand the business mentality of your partner better, you might have more ways to find reliable information. But we will see this later on in the presentation.
Yeah, excellent.
So what makes due diligence a successful due diligence? First of all, successful due diligence must not be confused with a successful transaction. These are two different things, and if you ever intend to hire an advisor on a success fee basis, make sure that you have at least two advisors, one for the transaction and one for the due diligence. Otherwise, you end up in a contradiction. If you have the same advisor for the due diligence and the transaction on a success fee basis, if he finds out during the due diligence that there might be a reason not to continue, this advisor would cut himself off the fees for the transaction. Yeah. So it would be not a good idea. So you have to be very careful to don't do this mistake, which happened in reality as well.
Clear conflict of interest. Yeah.
Exactly. So with regards to China, we have a huge field of problems which all have an influence on the due diligence. One, of course, is culture, language, organization, but also politics and technology issues. First of all, we want to look a little bit closer to the culture issue. One of the biggest principles, not only in business but in whole life, is the preserving face issue. Chinese people try to preserve face, and this is closely related to due diligence, as Chinese often feel intimidated to disclose any information, especially if the information is not in favor of the disclosing party. So Chinese companies are reluctant to disclose this information. What you can do about it is to constantly educate your partners, to make them understand what the purpose is and that you are trying to help. The next issue is that in some cases, or in many cases, the Chinese people value a good relationship. Sometimes they are placing them even over material facts. So what you try to do is to establish and nurture a good relationship with your business partner. How to do it? You just sensitively handle unfavorable information and so on.
Yeah, so you are speaking about the trust. So how, building a trust with someone who you meet for the first time or the second time, it's very difficult in the Europe or in the Western countries. So how to do it in China, how to establish a relationship and a trust in practice here?
That's a very good question, and there's no one answer to it. You just have to a little bit go with the flow and see about how they feel about it. And have some dinner with these people, talk about what they are concerned about, and be prepared to listen. They might tell you off the chart, they might tell you many things which are valuable information you otherwise would not be able to get.
Thank you.
Another problem is also related to this preserving phase, how reliable are the information. To cut a long story short, not all the information provided by the target may be reliable to 100%. The reason is not always that they don't want to or they on purpose disguise information. One purpose might also be that they don't know better. Sometimes they are not the best organized corporate structures, and sometimes the people you are asking are not the most informed people, so you might get information which are not accurate or complete. What you could do, you just cross-check the relevant information. The more relevant the information is for your business or what you want to do, the more important it is to have it cross-checked and make sure that the information is complete and correct. One of the most important things to get the information you want to is to get the personnel in the correct way. Due diligence is teamwork. There is not one, at least not to my knowledge, one person who knows Chinese, China, Europe, who knows all legal aspects of your industry, who knows all financial aspects, and who is an expert in tax advice on foreign and Chinese tax laws. So you have to have a team with experts from different fields. Your accountant, for instance, needs to be familiar with the Chinese and the international accounting standards, because not always do all Chinese companies adhere to international standards. So you have to be able to translate the Chinese accounting into the foreign or your own accounting standard system. One piece of advice I want to cordially invite to listen to is to bring language capacity on board. To rely on random translation agencies is risky. Not all agencies have the capacity to translate correctly, especially in different negotiation contexts. Secondly, information gathering depends on the voluntary cooperation of the target. So make sure to explain to your partners the process of the due diligence and to have your due diligence list prepared in English and Chinese languages. Why is that? If you have it only in English, the people could, even if they would understand, which is not in all cases, cannot in all cases be assured, even if they would understand, they would have an excuse to say, oh, we didn't get it the correct way. So make sure that you have a bilingual checklist and make sure that your translation is really up to standard and to the business language. So, without any further ado, let's look to the procedure, how to deal with the due diligence. Okay. In the first stage, we have three major steps. The first contact, verification of information, and involving third parties. How to do the first contact? Of course, it's not the very first contact of the two businesses. Business executives might have met before to talk about getting together. What I mean with first contact is having the due diligence team meeting the other party, having the due diligence list delivered to the other party, and actually visit the target. and then the target sends the documents or the corresponding documents from the list either to a data room or to your office or to your advisor's office, where they can then check, and in the second step visit the other party again to collect missing materials and to physically check whether everything is in place or whether everything which is on paper really exists in reality, and then to verify certain documents. And the third step, everything which could not be made sure can then be confirmed by just asking third parties which are involved, contract parties, debt creditors, debtors, and so on, or even visit authorities. After that, a due diligence report is prepared. This report will contain all the risks and will also make some advice on how to overcome some risks. And what then follows is just the decision-making process. The stakeholders need to meet, to discuss, and to find out whether to discontinue or how to work around or work with the risks they have found out so far.
So we are talking about the building due diligence team, about the visits. Well, from your experience, what's your suggestion? Who shall visit the target? Should it be a whole big business delegation, including CEO or CFO, or should it be just the top management, or should it be only people on the working level, like accountants and so on?
For the first meeting, it would be a good idea to have a big delegation, to have the CEO, to build up some trust with the other CEO of your company, and to have a little signing procedure for the memorandum of understanding, and to establish a first relationship and to see whether the people get along with each other. All the other meetings should be held on a working level, with the experts meeting and talking with each other. They may be accompanied by the CEO, but for the working meetings, it should be made sure that the experts are meeting. And for the third parties, for the very last step, the confirmation of documented information, this should be strictly limited to advisors or lawyers, even especially if third parties are involved, to make sure that the questions are asked in a correct way and to not make the people too much afraid of big cases or big company people.
Yeah.
So after this short introduction of the procedure, let's see what the content of the due diligence needs to talk about. And the first part is the corporate part. You have to make sure that the company you are dealing with does exist, and that it does exist in the form you think they exist, and that all approval documents, registration documents, and so on are in order. What you see on this slide is a business license, a typical business license, which states the kind of enterprise. This is a limited liability company, and the year of incorporation, and the registered capital, and so on. And the business license comes in two different ways. The first one you see is the actual business license. The second one is official copy of the business license, which states further information, including the scope of business. And with that, you have to check all constitutional documents. If you have a Chinese company, you check the articles of association. If you have a joint venture, there is a joint venture contract which gives you more information. You also have to check all the changes in these documents and all amendments to these documents before you change all subsidiaries, branches, and the whole corporate governance structure. And with this, I have a little case study where two companies wanted to come together. They're all from the pharmaceutical industry, and it is A Pharma and Biomed being the partner company, the target, and A Pharma being the investor. They found each other and thought they would be a perfect match, and the Chinese target company was operating as a limited liability company. However, reference check with the Administration of Industry and Commerce revealed that this company has been established in 2003 as a joint equity cooperation enterprise. And this status has never been changed officially. So the business license was still showing this, the status as cooperative enterprise. And this had as a consequence that they never had required any manufacturing enterprise capability and were not able to produce any medicine, what they were doing, but in fact they were not allowed to. So if you cooperate with a Chinese company or investigate your target, make sure that what they tell you is true by checking the reference with the authorities. If you then, in the next step, check the assets of your target company, there are two positions you need to check. First is whether the assets really do exist, either physically, that means they really are in the world, or on paper, that means whether they legally exist or whether they are owned by the party who claims ownership for this. And on the second step, you have to check whether these assets are fit for the intended use. Because if they exist, but you are not allowed to use them in the way you want to, you still cannot make any sense out of these. So you have to check all the licenses and all encumbrances, whether any other party has a right to such assets. One special asset is real estate. In China, you cannot privately own land. Land is either collectively owned, this is mostly true for rural land, or state-owned. And with state-owned land, you can have it in two ways, either allocated to you with the land use right, or granted. And if you want to make use of it, if you want to transfer it or lease it, you have to be aware that only granted land use right can be transferred, leased, and used for security purposes.
Yeah. Excuse me, another interruption. I can imagine I'm a small and medium-sized enterprise in Europe. I try to establish a joint venture here in China, but I do not intend to buy a real estate. Is it still necessary for me to go into that much detail about investigating land use rights or what types of rights it is? Does it make sense to me if I don't want to buy a real estate?
It does. And many problems arise from land use rights problems. I have one example from real life. A German company wanted to establish a joint venture with a Chinese company. It was a Chinese milk farm. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to use the cow manure to produce biogas, and then wanted to use the biogas to generate energy, and wanted then to connect this energy to the grid and sell it to the grid actually. What happened was, as long as they produced the biogas and as long as they used this energy for their own purposes, there was no problem at all. But as soon as they wanted or applied for the grid connection, they have been denied this grid connection. The reason was the land which has been contributed by the joint venture partner was farmland. Of course, it was a milk farm. And they put this generator for the energy on this farmland. For their own use, there was no problem. As soon as they wanted to sell it, they have been told, you can sell it only to the grid if it's produced on industrial land. As they didn't have made due diligence before, they were not aware of this problem, with the result that in the third year, even their business license for producing energy was revoked and they had to start from scratch. So it's true, some failures at least of the transaction are failures of the due diligence.
Yeah. It's a convincing case.
This is again an example of a land use certificate, and if you see marked in red, this is a granted land use certificate. If you have these two characters on your certificate, you can be sure that it at least basically can be transferred and can be used for the purposes then explained. As in China, land use rights and buildings are separate. You have to be sure if you want to use a building that you also check the building property certificate. Because in China, the land and the buildings are not as strongly related to each other as in other jurisdictions. So if you want to check on real estate, you make sure that you check all the details regarding all the sites and building, including all information about any payments that have been made in relation with any premises, zoning options, and the way that land can be used, either industrially or rurally or whatsoever. Intellectual property. Many mergers and acquisitions are made for the sole purpose to get hand on intellectual property, be it patents or be it other rights to use, to produce, and so on. And there I come back to our pharma case, where the partner claimed to have patents for 3 kinds of medicine. And however, the check with the patent office reveals that these patents did exist, but the right of use for our target company was based on a drug cooperation development agreement, which was a valid agreement, but which only stipulated for the obligation to transfer the patents to our target company. However, this transfer never took place. And in China, as in other European jurisdictions as well, the obligation and the transaction itself go separate ways. If you're obliged to do something, that doesn't mean that it's automatically done. There are other steps to be taken to make this transaction happen. And in this case, this did not take place. This was the one part, and one medicine was only on a license agreement. And again, research revealed that this license agreement has only been signed by one of 2 owners of the whole patent, and the other owner refused to sign anything. So even though they acted on this license agreement, there is a challenge. This might be challenged afterwards, which is a potential risk. You can be put out of business of producing on the basis of this patent if you don't make sure that you really have rights to it. Other assets, of course, you have to check whether be it vehicles or vessels or other equipment. Whatever you want to make use of, make sure that these exist and that you are able and allowed to make use of them in the purpose you want to do. Labor is another big issue which should not come too short in your due diligence, but I know that the European Union also has a labor.
Yeah, that's true. Recently, we have published a new guideline on the labor law, and we will have some webinars on the human resources. So you may find this information on our website as well.
However, in every due diligence process, you have to check on the labor force of your target company. Some people call it hidden time bomb because there are several cases where you have to be aware that if you want to get rid of people, that you have to pay severance payment, even for a lawful termination of the contract, even for the end of a fixed-term labor contract, which will not be continued. You have to pay severance pay, and you have to be aware of it if you want to acquire a target which has a large labor force, for instance. I'm not going to go into detail with all the aspects of the labor issues, because you will find them on the report and on the slide anyways. Material contracts. You see this little picture, which is a ghost coming out of a contract. This is actually a real estate contract. And this might illustrate how contracts also may have some risks in them. So make sure to have at least all contracts checked with a certain amount involved. Of course, it doesn't need much words that you have to check the financing of the company thoroughly, including loans, including options, warrants, and securities provided to other parties or provided to your target by other parties. Taxation. Taxation bears a tremendous potential for administrative, civil, and even criminal liability. So make sure that you have an expert, especially in mergers cases and in acquisition cases, to check all the records and to check back all payments of taxes for the last 5 years, because you, after the transaction, can be held liable for tax payments which have been occurred in the past, even if you do a merger or if you do an acquisition. Not so much for joint ventures, but in the other cases you have to be aware of it. Then there are other issues which you have to pay attention to. As our time is limited, I cannot go into detail with every aspect, but I want to highlight some of other issues which you at least have to be aware of while doing due diligence. One is product liability. China has significantly increased their product liability laws. And in China, manufacturers can be held liable for any losses or injuries caused by defect or by defective products, even without fault. They only can exculpate, saying that the defect didn't exist at the time when the product has been circulated, or that at that time it was not possible to find out about such defect. And bribery, corruption, or as we sometimes call it, sensible payments, are another issue. Of course, this issue you cannot target directly by asking your target, have you ever bribed anyone or did any payment which is not in order? This you have to find out very carefully by checking, for instance, the accounts and the expenses accounts. Other issues include environmental issues, antitrust issues, litigation and arbitration, civil litigation, and criminal litigation. Okay. So now some formalities on how to verify your information. There are some publicly available information, like for the company records, the State Administration for Industry and Commerce, or for foreign invested enterprises, the central or local agency of the Ministry of Commerce. There are other records, like the Vehicle Administration Agency or the Maritime Administration for vehicles, airplanes, and other vessels. Intellectual property can be checked with the State Intellectual Property Office, and trademarks, of course, with the Trademark Bureau. Apart from that, you could always use common sense to verify your documents and information, and in really tricky cases, you can also hire investigation agencies to help you with that. But this you have to make an estimation on the potential risk and the costs involved.
Yeah, Mr. Shah, we are speaking about the public available information, registers and so on. How reliable are those publicly available information and the records?
To some extent, they are reliable, especially for state administration, for industry and commerce. They are quite in order. But not all public records are very well organized at the moment. They are not always accurate, or sometimes they are incomplete. So even if you have public record entries, you have to keep your common sense awake and to make sure that they are consistent with the information you get from other sides. Well, this gets us close to the end of the speech. And if there are some points I want you to take away from this seminar, there are three major points. Please take the Chinese particularities into consideration when planning and exercising a due diligence procedure in China. The due diligence procedure might differ from what you are used to at home. The second, different transaction structures call for different due diligence processes. Please don't waste your money on lengthy and cost-intensive processes which do not fit your structure. If you have a very intense relationship, however, don't save on those costs. They will fire back on you and cost you heavily afterwards. And the third, important documents need to be verified in one way or the other.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scheller, for the very comprehensive presentation. We have now have about 5 to 10 minutes for the questions and answers. So please, I encourage you to send the questions to us. In addition, I would like to point out that all the webinar, including the presentation and the recording, will be available on our websites for the downloading. So for those who don't have all the information during the presentation, don't worry, you can log in into the our eusme.org.cn websites, and under the webinar you can download this presentation. So now to some of your questions which we have received so far. It seems that this question is coming from someone who has already experience with due diligence in China, and the question is, how relevant are old contracts for a new operation? It probably means for the client or the listener is probably asking, is doing some kind of a merger or the acquisition, and he's asking how relevant are old contracts for a new operation?
Well, it depends on the contract. If the contract is closed and the contract is already has already put into place and is finished, there will be no big consequences. However, some contracts are valid for a very long time, and they will be continued with the new operation if it is a merger case, for instance. And the new operation or the acquiring operation is also liable for any defaults in this contract, and they have to continue to fulfill this contract. That you buy a company doesn't mean that all those contracts of this company are finished. They are still in place. And some contracts have very tricky clauses on either any restrictions, for instance, of doing business in the same field. And these have to be adhered to as well. So there is some relevance, and some contracts have some clauses for damages and so on, and these need to be checked very carefully before putting them aside.
Yeah. Thank you. Then one of our listeners is asking something about the HR compensation. Is it usual, he asked, in China to offer key employees a share in a joint venture?
Well, it is not yet common practice, but it is not unseen and unheard of. In many cases, it is practiced that key employees are offered a share in the joint venture. But this is not yet in all cases the case, and you have to see from case to case whether it's worth or not. But it's not unseen. We had some cases where the companies offered shares in the joint venture company to key employees.
Another question is about the financial statements. And our speaker is asking, sometimes small Chinese companies are said to have at least two types of financial statements, one official one and then real one. How do you cope? What to do in that situation?
Well, the answer is very easy. You check both, and you check both for consistency, and you have to be aware of both, and you have to be aware of the risks which follow from these official and unofficial ones. Of course, if you do the due diligence, you need to know the real situation. So you have to check the real statement as well. If it is not disclosed to you, you have to find it out in one way or the other by checking all the accounts and the consistency and the real cash flow. You have to really check where the cash comes in and where it goes to and on which accounts it's going to be put. So a simple answer, you just have to check both. You don't have to decide on which to follow. You just check and find out the real situation and how to cope with the double standard afterwards and how to make it consistent with after the transition phase.
Yeah. We are coming to the end, so one last question, and basically it's a question for two listeners. How long does due diligence really take in China?
This is a very good question, and again, there's no one answer. Every due diligence is different, and every due diligence procedure is different. If you have a major trillion transaction involving lots of money, lots of companies, of course the due diligence takes longer. If you have only a small joint venture or a small company coming together with a Chinese small company, it's more quickly. What you should take into consideration time-wise for the due diligence is at least 1 month, including the preparation and doing the due diligence for a small case. It's not that the data room is open for 1 month. The phase of exchanging data might be limited to 2 weeks, but the whole preparation, evaluation, and checking the reliance of the evidence and of the information you get might take more time. So at least 1 month. More realistic is 3 to 6 months if you have bigger cases.
Okay, so we are coming to the end. It was the last question from the audience to our speaker, Mr. Michael Schroeder. I would like to thank you very much for giving us the excellent presentation, very informative one. And we hope that we will see you someday here as well for the other presentation as well. I would like to ask our audience, after finishing the webinar, there is a small questionnaire about the satisfaction and what we would like to see as a further topic and so on. So please take time for filling it this information. And I would like to invite you for the next Tuesday, same time, same day, same time, for the next webinar, how to cope with HR challenges in China, and it will be this time about recruiting and employing foreigners in China. So thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, and let's hopefully to be connected next Tuesday.